The morning my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, I was standing at the kitchen counter in my scrubs, trying to eat a bowl of oatmeal before a 12-hour shift. I was 31 years old, a second-year attending physician at a regional hospital in Portland, Oregon. My father had built his internal medicine practice from nothing over 30 years, and I had joined it after my residency, quietly determined to prove I could carry what he left behind. My husband ran the practice's finances. That was the arrangement. I handled patients. He handled money. Everyone said we were perfect together. The doorbell rang again. I wasn't expecting anyone. My husband had already left. A breakfast meeting with a vendor, he'd said. I set down my spoon and walked to the door. The woman standing on my porch was old and very small. She wore a rain jacket that had been washed so many times the color had given up entirely. Her hair was white and thin, pulled back with a plastic clip. She was holding a canvas tote bag against her chest like it was keeping her upright. When she saw me, something moved through her eyes. Relief, I think. Or maybe it was the particular exhaustion of someone who has carried something a long, long time and has finally made it to the place where they can put it down. "Are you Sloan?" she asked. Her voice was papery. She had to stop to breathe between sentences. "I am," I said. "Can I help you?" "My name is Agnes. I used to live on Burnside, in the Halcyon building, the one your husband pays the rent on." She watched my face carefully when she said that. "I've been your neighbor for 6 years. His neighbor, I mean. I don't think he knows I exist." I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. I thought she might be confused. Some of my older patients came in like this, a piece of something that made sense, surrounded by things that didn't. I opened the door wider and asked her to come in. She sat in the armchair near the window, the one nobody ever used because it faced the wall. She placed the tote bag on her lap and didn't let go of it. I offered her coffee. She shook her head. "I have a daughter," she said. "Her name is Faye. She's 29. She paused. "She's been in love with your husband since she was 22. He told her he'd leave you. He always said it was almost time. He just needed things at the practice to settle down. He just needed to get through one more year." She looked at her hands. 7 years of almost time. The oatmeal on the counter had gone cold. I was standing in the middle of my own kitchen, not knowing when I had walked there. "I'm sick," Agnes said. "Pancreatic. The doctor told me last month I have maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8 if things go well." She didn't say it like she wanted sympathy. She said it the way you say the weather. I kept quiet because Faye asked me to. She said it would ruin everything if I said something, that he just needed more time. Her voice tightened. "I've been keeping this secret for 7 years. I can't die with it." "You're telling me," I said, and my voice came out very steady, which surprised me, "that my husband has been with your daughter for 7 years. "Yes." "And you're telling me now because I'm dying," she said simply. "And because there are 2 boys." I sat down on the kitchen floor, not on a chair. On the floor. I don't know why. My legs just made a decision without me. "Faye has 2 sons," Agnes said. "Caden is 5. Remy is 3. They know their father. He comes on Tuesday evenings and every other Saturday. He brings them things, trucks, juice boxes, little trinkets. They run to the door when they hear his key in the lock." She paused. "He has a key." The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a truck backed up, beeping. "I'm not going to pretend I handled it better than I did," she said. "I yelled at Faye when I found out. I told her this would destroy her, but she was so sure. She believed every word he said." Agnes pressed her lips together. "She still does." She reached into the tote bag and pulled out an envelope. She placed it on the coffee table between us. "Those are copies," she said. "Bank statements, rental agreements, photos. I'm not asking you to do anything. I can't die and have those boys grow up in a lie. I can't die knowing I stayed quiet." She stood slowly, holding the arm of the chair. "I've done what I came to do." I didn't stop her. I sat on the kitchen floor and listened to the front door close. For the first 10 minutes, I didn't open the envelope. I just sat there with the refrigerator humming. Then I got up, poured the cold oatmeal down the sink, rinsed the bowl, dried it, and put it back in the cabinet. I do not know why I did all of that. I think my body needed something to finish. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. The first thing I saw was a lease agreement, a 2-bedroom apartment in the Halcyon building on Burnside. The lessee listed was a property management LLC with a name I didn't recognize, Crestview Holdings. But on the financial authorization page, the signature was my husband's. I knew his signature. I had watched him sign 100 documents at closing, at the practice, at our mortgage. The particular way he looped the G in his last name, it was him. The bank statements were from an account I had never seen, not our joint account, not the practice's operating account. A personal account in his name alone opened 7 years ago, with automatic monthly transfers to Crestview Holdings. The amounts were not small. I looked at the deposits coming in. Some were labelled consulting income, some were labelled reimbursements. None of it matched any vendor or contract I recognised from the practice. I worked a 12-hour shift that day. I do not know how. I saw 11 patients, ordered labs, wrote 3 referrals, and explained a new diabetes diagnosis to a 54-year-old man who was frightened and needed me to be calm. I was calm. I have been trained to be calm when everything is going wrong, because someone in the room has to be. My husband came home at 6:30. He had brought Thai food. He kissed me on the cheek and told me about a billing software update he was rolling out. I said that sounded good. I ate pad see ew and listened to him talk about the software, and I smiled in the right places. I had already taken the envelope out of the kitchen and knopped it in the fireproof box in my home office behind the shelf of medical textbooks, behind the one about nephrology that nobody ever opens. I waited 4 days before I called my father. He was 71, retired, living in a house in Bend with my mother and a bad hip. He had handed me the practice 3 years earlier with a ceremony that was mostly him trying not to cry in front of the staff. He had built that practice the way some people build cathedrals, slowly, with everything they had, with the assumption that it would outlast them. I drove to Bend on a Saturday morning while my husband thought I was going to a CME seminar. I spread the papers on my parents' kitchen table. My mother left the room after the first 5 minutes. My father sat there and read every page. When he finished, he took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. "How long have you known?" he asked. 4 days. "Have you talked to an attorney?" "Not yet." He nodded slowly. "Before you do anything else," he said, "I want you to call Marguerite Hollis. She's a forensic accountant. She and I worked together years ago on a malpractice case. She doesn't miss things." He paused. "And Sloan, I need you to look at whether this money is coming out of the practice." I had not wanted to think about that part. I had been thinking about the apartment, the boys, the key and the lock. I had not yet let myself think about what it meant that the deposits in that account were labelled consulting income and reimbursements. The answer, when Marguerite finished her analysis 2 weeks later, was worse than I had feared. My husband had set up Crestview Holdings as a pass-through. Invoices were generated for services the practice had allegedly outsourced, consulting work, billing support, facilities management. The invoices looked real. They had business addresses, phone numbers, invoice numbers with professional formatting, but when Marguerite pulled the contractor license records, the business registration filings, the EIN paperwork, the companies didn't exist. Or rather, they existed on paper with no employees, no services, no offices. My husband was the only person behind all of them. For 7 years, he had been writing checks from the practice to companies he owned, and the money had flowed directly to Crestview Holdings, directly to the apartment on Burnside, directly to Faye and those 2 small boys. We had lost close to $400,000, a third of the practice's reserves. The amount that should have been sitting in our operating account, covering payroll and equipment and the lease on our second location, had been quietly, methodically moved somewhere else. Marguerite set down her summary sheet and looked at me across the conference table in her office downtown. She was a small woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and absolutely no expression on her face, which I had learned by then was how she looked when she was angry. He also authorized 2 loans against the practice's line of credit, she said, both in the last 18 months, both at the maximum draw. The payments have been current but barely, and the practice's reserves wouldn't survive another quarter at this rate. Is there criminal exposure? I asked. That's for your attorney to assess, she said, but from where I sit, yes. Wire fraud, at minimum. Potentially tax evasion, given how the invoices were structured. This wasn't impulsive, this was designed. That evening, I sat in my car in the parking garage under Marguerite's building for 45 minutes. I did not cry. I had cried twice, once on the kitchen floor the morning Agnes came, and once in a bathroom stall at the hospital 3 days later, very quietly, between patients. After that, something in me had shifted into a different gear. I recognized the feeling from residency, from 36-hour calls, from the particular state of mind you reach when you are past the point of processing things emotionally, and your body just gets on with it. I thought about Agnes. I thought about what it had cost her to come to my door. 6 weeks, the doctor had said. Maybe 8. I thought about what she said. I can't die knowing I stayed quiet. Then I called my attorney. His name was Grant, and he had been my father's attorney for 15 years. I had met him at practice holiday parties, a calm, grey-haired man who wore the same 2 suits in rotation and spoke so deliberately that you sometimes had to wait an extra beat after he finished a sentence to make sure he was done. He listened to everything. He asked 3 questions. Then he said, "Sloan, I need you to not confront him yet. I know that's hard. But if he moves the money offshore or destroys records, we lose our leverage. Let me make some calls first." I agreed. I went home and made dinner. I ate dinner. I watched television with my husband. He put his arm around me during a commercial and told me I seemed tired and that I should take better care of myself. I said I would. I functioned like this for 3 weeks. Then we were ready. I scheduled a staff meeting at the practice, a quarterly operations review, the kind we held every 3 months. My husband thought it was routine. He showed up in his good blazer with a legal pad, because he always took notes at these meetings to look thorough. He sat at the table with our office manager and our billing coordinator and our front desk supervisor. He poured himself a coffee from the carafe. Then Grant walked in, and then a woman from the Oregon Department of Justice who had been copied on our complaint, and then Marguerite carrying her binder. My husband looked at me. "This isn't a staff meeting," I said. I had practiced saying that for a week. In my car, in the shower, in the supply room at the hospital. I wanted to say it without my voice breaking, and I did. I placed a summary binder in front of him, Marguerite's analysis, every invoice, every wire, every shell company, the lease for the Burnside apartment, the photos Agnes had given me of him with Faye, with the boys at a birthday party for Caden's 4th birthday that I had not attended because I didn't know it existed. "These are copies," I said. "The originals are with the Oregon DOJ." He looked at the binder and then at me and then at Grant. "Sloan," he said, "this isn't, you don't understand the full context. Those companies were for legitimate." "Don't," Grant said, and something in the flatness of it stopped him. He looked at the binder again. He turned one page, then another. I watched the colour leave his face the way water leaves a glass, quickly, all at once. He had thought he was careful. He had thought he had structured it well enough that nobody would see the shape of it, unless they were looking very hard. He had not counted on me looking at all. 7 years, I said. 2 children, $400,000. I leaned forward just slightly. You told me the practice was having a tight year. You told me we needed to cut the supply budget. I switched to cheaper gloves for my exam rooms. I paused. Do you know how that feels in hindsight? He didn't answer. He pressed his hands flat on the table as if he needed something to hold on to. The woman from the DOJ explained his options. Grant explained the civil complaint we were simultaneously filing. Our office manager, who had been with the practice for 14 years and who I had warned privately the day before, sat with her hands folded and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. When they escorted him out, Grant had arranged for a professional courtesy, a quiet exit before the parking lot filled up. He stopped at the door and looked back at me. "What about us?" he said. And I remember thinking, he means our marriage. He is asking about our marriage, right now, in this room, as if that is the relevant question. "There is no us," I said. "There is a civil complaint, there is a criminal referral, and there is a practice I am going to spend the next several years rebuilding. That's what there is." He left. The door closed. The room was very quiet. My office manager put her hand over mine on the table and didn't say anything, which was the exact right thing to do. Agnes died 11 days later. The hospital called me. She had listed me, of all people, as an emergency contact, probably because she'd had my card in her wallet from the morning she came to my door. I went. She was in a room on the 4th floor, which happened to be the floor I worked on, which felt strange and also somehow appropriate. She was unconscious when I arrived. I sat with her for 2 hours. I am not sure why. She had done what she came to do and she knew it, and I think she died with something loosened in her chest that had been tight for 7 years. Faye did not come to the hospital. I found out later she had driven to Agnes's apartment when she heard about the arrest, found the place empty, and called my husband's cell phone 37 times in one afternoon. He did not answer from county lockup. In the weeks that followed, people told me I seemed remarkably composed for someone going through what I was going through. I said, "Thank you." I did not explain that composure is a skill you develop when people bring you the worst news of their lives every day of the week and need you to hold it with them. I had been trained for this. Not for this specifically, but for the thing underneath it, the ability to stay functional when the world goes sideways. My father had taught me that by example, every day, for 30 years. I worked with Marguerite and Grant for 8 months, unwinding the financial structure my husband had built. We clawed back $260,000 through the civil judgment. The rest was gone, paid to the Burnside apartment, to private school tuition for Caden, to a used car, to whatever else a person spends $400,000 on when they are building a second life with someone else's money. The line of credit was restructured. 2 vendors agreed to defer payment schedules. I sold some equipment I had been planning to upgrade anyway, slightly earlier than planned. I stood in front of my staff twice during that period, once to explain what had happened, once to tell them everyone's job was safe. The second time, my front desk supervisor started clapping, and then everyone did, and I had to look at the ceiling for a moment to get through it. I hired a new practice administrator. Her name was Wendy, and she was meticulous and cheerful and had 3 computer monitors on her desk at all times and a system for everything. She instituted a due authorization policy for all expenditures over $500. She told me this was standard best practice at practices her size, and she couldn't imagine why it hadn't been in place before. I did not explain why it hadn't been in place before. The criminal case moved slowly the way these things do. 14 months after that morning in the conference room, my husband stood before a federal judge in Portland in a suit that no longer fit the way it used to. The fraud charges carried a sentence that meant he would be in his mid-40s before he saw the outside of a facility. The restitution order meant that everything he had, the retirement account, the investment portfolio, the half equity in our home that the divorce settlement had awarded him, went back to the practice first. His attorney had tried several approaches. None of them worked. Marguerite's documentation was, as she might have put it herself, comprehensive. I did not go to the sentencing. My attorney went. He called me afterward and read me the relevant numbers from his notes. I wrote them down. I thanked him. I went back to my afternoon clinic. The thing about Carden and Remy took me longer to decide. Months, in fact. I thought about it the way I think about difficult clinical decisions, by going quiet and waiting for the answer to come clear. Agnes had asked me, who will look after them? She hadn't asked me outright. She hadn't put it in words, but she had come to my door. specifically my door, with those photos in her bag, and she had told me about the boys in the same breath as the bank statements. I think she trusted something in me that she couldn't name. Their mother had resources through the civil judgment, a modest settlement, since she had no knowledge of the fraud, but Faye was not, by several accounts, doing well. She had lost the person she had organized 7 years around, and the loss had not made her generous or clear-sighted. She was angry at Agnes. She was angry at me. She was angry at everyone except the man who had actually built the circumstances she was living in. I established an educational fund through a community foundation. It was structured as an anonymous scholarship for children of families impacted by financial fraud. Technically that was true, and technically Caden and Remy qualified, and technically Faye would never have accepted money she knew came from me. The fund covered school tuition, after-school programs, summer enrichment. It was administered by the foundation. My name was nowhere on any of it. My father was the only person I told. He sat quietly for a moment after I explained it. Then he said, "Your grandfather would have liked you." I had never met my grandfather. He had died before I was born. But my father had told me stories. A man who had nothing, who built something, who believed that what you built was only worth keeping if you kept your character while you built it. "I'm not doing it for her," I said, "and I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it because there are 2 small boys who are going to spend their whole lives inside the consequences of what their parents did, and that's enough of a burden without adding poverty to it." My father nodded. He understood this. He had treated patients for 30 years in a practice he built on the idea that people deserved care, regardless of who they were or what they'd done. You treat the person in front of you. You make the decision you can live with. 2 years later, I met someone at a medical conference in Seattle. He was an emergency physician from Minneapolis, quiet, funny in the dry way that people who see a lot of difficult things develop as a coping mechanism. We had dinner once at the conference, then called for 3 months, then he visited Portland, then I visited Minneapolis. It was slow and careful and felt nothing like the story I'd been living inside. It felt like the beginning of a story instead of the end of one. I did not tell him everything right away. I told him as we went, the way you tell someone things when you're figuring out if they're the kind of person who can hold things carefully. He was. The practice is doing well now. Better than well, actually. Wendy's systems turned out to be exactly what we needed. We expanded the second location, added 2 more physicians, started a patient assistance fund for uninsured visits that my father had always talked about and never quite gotten around to. Our patient satisfaction scores went up the year after everything happened, which seemed counterintuitive until I thought about it. The staff knew the full story, knew how close we had come to losing everything, and they had decided to stay. There is something about a group of people who've been through a storm together that changes the quality of the work. I think about Agnes sometimes, especially on Tuesday evenings, which used to be the night my husband drove to Burnside. I think about her sitting in that apartment across the hall, knowing what she knew for 6 years. I think about what that cost her. The silence, the complicity she never chose but couldn't escape, the daughter's anger that she must have known was coming the moment she decided to finally speak. She didn't knock on my door to hurt anyone. She knocked on my door because she was dying and she wanted her grandchildren to have a chance at something real. And she must have thought on some level that I was the person who could give it to them. I don't know why she thought that. Maybe she had watched her daughter choose a man who lied beautifully and she wanted the opposite. Maybe she had nothing left to lose and nowhere else to go and my card was in her wallet. Whatever the reason, she was right that the truth had to go somewhere. Lies don't get lighter with time, they get heavier. She had been carrying one for 7 years and it had taken everything she had. In the end, she put it down, and she died with a clear conscience in a hospital room on my floor. And I like to think that mattered. I have my father's practice now, fully. I have my name on the door. My name, not a shared name, not a hyphenated compromise. I have 12 staff members and 2 locations and a patient load that keeps me busy in exactly the way I want to be busy. I have Wendy and her 3 monitors. I have my father calling on Sunday mornings to ask about the numbers and then about my life, in that order, which is just how he is. I have a relationship that is moving slowly and well with someone who has seen parts of my story and not flinched. I have 2 small boys somewhere in Portland who are, as far as I know, going to school. Who are, as far as I can tell from the Foundation's annual reports, doing fine. Who do not know my name. Who do not know that the woman whose marriage their father quietly ended is also the woman who quietly made sure they wouldn't have to fight their way out of circumstances they didn't create. That's not forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. I haven't forgiven him. Forgiveness requires a kind of forgetting I don't have access to. And anyway, what he did was not only to me, it was to my father, to the staff, to every patient who almost found out their doctor's practice was on the edge of collapse because the money was somewhere else. Some things you don't forgive. You just decide what you're going to do with them. What I did was this. I held the weight of it and I made a decision I could live with, and then I went back to work. There are people who will tell you that what I did, the fund, the anonymity, the boys, was foolish. That I was cleaning up a mess someone else made. That the children of people who wrong you are not your responsibility. I've heard all of that. Some of those people are not wrong. But I am my father's daughter, and my father spent 30 years believing that you meet people where they are, and you do what you can, and you let that be enough. Agnes came to my door with the truth because she thought I could carry it. She was right. I still think about the moment Agnes sat down in that armchair, the one nobody ever used, and put her canvas bag on her lap like it was the last thing she had left to hold. She was dying. She knew it. And instead of spending what little time she had resting, she got dressed, took a bus across the city, and knocked on the door of a woman she had never met. That took something. Not just courage in the abstract sense, the real kind, the kind that costs you something and you pay it anyway. What I've come to understand, sitting with this story long enough that it stopped feeling like something that happened to me and started feeling like something I learned from, is that everything that unfolded did so because of choices. Not fate, not luck. Choices made by specific people that sent consequences forward in time like ripples you can't stop once the stone hits the water. My husband chose to take the easy thing over the right thing, and then chose it again and again for 7 years. That's what fraud actually is, not one dramatic decision, but 1,000 small ones, each slightly easier than stopping. Agnes chose to stay quiet for years because her daughter asked her to, and she paid for that in ways I'll never fully know. And then, when she had almost no time left, she chose differently. She chose the truth over the peace of her final weeks, knowing it would cost her Faye's forgiveness, knowing she might die with her daughter hating her. She did it anyway. I think about that choice every time I face something I'd rather look away from. The willingness to see clearly, even when it's painful, that's not a personality trait you're born with, it's a discipline. Agnes had it. My father had it. I had to work to find it in myself, standing in my own kitchen on the floor with an envelope on the table in front of me. What saved the practice, what saved me, wasn't anger. It wasn't even the evidence, though the evidence mattered. It was the decision to think clearly when everything in me wanted to react. To call Marguerite before I confronted him. To wait 3 weeks when every instinct said to move, now. Intelligence in a crisis isn't about being the smartest person in the room, it's about slowing down enough to see the whole board. And then there's what I did after, the fund, the boys, the anonymity. People ask me, when I tell this story, why I did that, why extend anything toward children connected to the person who took so much from me. The honest answer is that I looked at Caden and Remy and I saw 2 kids who were going to spend their entire lives inside the wreckage of their parents' choices. That's already a hard start. I wasn't going to add to it. Not because I owe them anything. Because I get to decide what kind of person I am, and that's the decision I could live with. The practice is still standing. My name is on the door. Agnes's grandchildren are in school somewhere in Portland, learning things, becoming people. None of this happened because the universe arranged it neatly. It happened because an old woman in a faded rain jacket decided 11 days before she died that the truth mattered more than her comfort. I think about her every time I do something hard and right when no one is watching. She taught me that.